Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a case that, honestly, it feels less like a traditional crime procedural,
Yeah.
with fingerprints and shoe prints, and much more like a terrifying real-time cautionary tale about the digital footprint we all leave behind. An indelible one. The subject, as many of you have followed, is the murder of Ana Walshe by her husband, Brian Walshe. It all tragically unfolded over the 2023 New Year holiday in Cohasset, Massachusetts. Now, what elevates this case from, let's say, a standard homicide investigation to a genuinely landmark legal precedent is one central, really surprising fact. Brian Walshe was convicted of first-degree murder, misleading a police investigation, and improper conveyance of a human body, despite the fact that investigators never, ever recovered the victim's bodily remains.
Never found her body.
Never. The jury returned that guilty verdict on December 15, 2025. And in doing so, they essentially proved that in our hyper-connected modern age, the perfect crime is, well, it's maybe impossible, even if you successfully get rid of the corpse. So our mission today is really custom-tailored for you. We're going deep into the confluence of evidence that secured this conviction. We're talking sophisticated digital forensics, a very clear, very powerful financial motive, and the minute-by-minute documentation of a calculated cover-up that was, well, it was basically recorded by the perpetrator himself.
He recorded his own plan.
He did. We're going to examine the precise timeline, the meticulous forensic recovery from the waste stream, and the legal strategies that successfully bridge that evidentiary gap left by the absence of a body.
What's fascinating here is precisely that legal innovation. I mean, the prosecution had to find a completely new way to establish the reality of the crime. This was, without a doubt, a nobody prosecution. And it really forced the legal system to evolve its very definition of proof.
Right.
Traditionally, you hear the phrase corpus delicti.
Right, body of the crime.
Exactly, which literally translates to body of the crime. And historically, that meant the body itself, or at least definite physical proof that a violent act resulting in death had occurred. But in the Commonwealth v. Brian Walshe case, the prosecution successfully argued that the convergence of digital evidence, those incredibly chilling, just self-incriminating Google searches Brian made, and the specific physical evidence later recovered, the bloodstained tools, the victim's personal effects found in the trash, that convergence established what they called the digital corpus delicti.
A digital body of evidence.
Precisely. The digital searches acted as an explicit roadmap. They didn't just suggest Brian committed the crime, they documented his specific intent, his motive, and his methodology in real time. And this level of documentation, when you match it with the physical evidence recovered from the waste stream, it just made the absence of the actual corpse irrelevant to the ultimate guilty verdict.
So technology, which he was trying to use to plan the erasure of his wife,
instead became the unblinking, irrefutable witness to the entire process.
And that digital roadmap, that step-by-step confession, that is what anchors this entire story. But to really understand the catastrophic pivot that happened on New Year's Day 2023, we first have to understand the marital dynamic, because it was clearly reaching a severe breaking point.
A tipping point.
Absolutely. Let's start with Ana Walshe. She was 39 at the time of her death, a dual citizen, born in Belgrade, Serbia. The sources all describe her story as, the classic immigrant success narrative. She began her career in hospitality, which is actually where she met Brian Walshe back in 2008.
Right.
But by late 2022, her professional trajectory was just soaring. It was demanding her focus and, critically, her presence outside of that Cohasset home.
Absolutely. She had ascended to a very high-ranking regional general manager position for Tishman Speyer,
Which is a huge firm.
It's a massive, leading international real estate firm. This was a job of significant responsibility, a considerable salary, and it required her to commute weekly to Washington, D.C. She was managing major properties, big teams down there, all while the family was still based in Massachusetts.
And this wasn't just, a career move for her. It was a foundational shift for the whole family structure.
Yeah.
Friends and colleagues consistently described her as radiant, ambitious, and incredibly driven, and specifically motivated by a desire to provide financial stability and a real future for her 3 young children.
The kids were 2, 4, and 6.
So young.
And this professional ambition, it forms the critical backdrop to the domestic volatility that really defined the end of 2022. The sources paint a very stark picture here. Ana was preparing for a major, definitive life transition. It seems to have been driven by this need to secure a stable future for her children, far, far away from the financial and legal instability that Brian had brought into their lives.
And that instability was escalating.
This impending separation is suggested by 2 key pieces of information we have. First, friends reported she had promised a big surprise for the new year,
It's a surprise, yeah.
which investigators firmly theorized was a definite plan to divorce Brian and relocate the children to D.C. permanently. I mean, that's where she had secured this stable, high-paying life. The second piece is that chilling text message.
Right, the text that suggested the domestic crisis had become acute just days before the murder. She texted her mother, Milanka Jubicic, in Belgrade on Christmas Day 2022. She urged her to come immediately. The text said, "Please, Mama, come tomorrow."
Wow.
Yeah. And while her mother, apparently due to poor health, wasn't able to travel, that message, it implies an urgent sense of danger, or at least an immediate need for a witness, maybe a support system inside that home.
It just confirms that the hostility wasn't some sudden flare-up. It was a powder keg.
A powder keg waiting to blow.
That text is extremely telling. It confirms that the foundation of the crisis was already laid, proving that whatever happened on January 1st was really the culmination of weeks, if not months, of rising tension about her departure. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the stark contrast in the personality and the situation of Brian Walshe.
It's a completely different story.
Completely. Brian's profile is a study in destructive privilege. He was born into affluence, the son of Dr. Thomas Walshe, who was a renowned Boston neurologist. But that privilege just dissolved pretty quickly, leading to this profound pathology and a history of some very serious criminal conduct.
And he was deeply estranged from his family, right? Specifically after a massive dispute over his father's estate.
A huge dispute.
And this wasn't just a simple disagreement over assets, was it? This revealed a deep-seated pathology that predated the murder by years.
Oh, yeah. Probate court documents exposed that Brian was accused by family associates of misappropriating millions of dollars in art and assets from his father's estate right after he died.
And what's truly damning, even before the violence in Cohasset, is the character evidence that was provided during those civil disputes. A longtime family friend, a Dr. Fred Pescator, submitted an affidavit that provided this chilling pre-crime context.
And this affidavit was just incredible. Dr. Pescator stated unequivocally that Brian is not only a sociopath, but also a very angry and physically violent person. And he even asserted that he had witnessed firsthand what Brian was capable of.
Wow.
Now, this originated in a civil fight over money, but it allowed the prosecution to establish a psychological foundation for his underlying nature. It showed a history of deception and volatility that made the subsequent violence seem, well, entirely plausible.
And beyond the family dispute, we really need to spend time on his documented history of sophisticated financial fraud.
Yes.
Because this history is crucial. It established Brian's methodology for crime-meticulous, calculated deceit, and it placed him in severe legal jeopardy right up until the time of the murder. We are, of course, talking about the infamous Andy Warhol art fraud case.
Exactly. And the complexity of that 2016 fraud, which resulted in his subsequent house arrest, is so important. It demonstrates that Brian was highly skilled at weaving these meticulous narratives of deceit, a skill he tried and catastrophically failed to apply to homicide.
So what was the scheme exactly?
The scheme involved 2 fake Andy Warhol Shadows paintings. He had initially acquired authentic Warhol paintings from a friend in South Korea, supposedly to sell them on the friend's behalf.
Okay.
But instead of selling them for the friend, he sold the authentic works privately in 2011 to a gallery. Then, years later, he commissioned a set of high-quality replicas of those same paintings.
And the deceitful execution of selling the fakes. It just reveals the calculated nature of the man. In November 2016, he listed the fake paintings on eBay for $100,000.
Right.
He wasn't just selling art. He was constructing a false history to lend credibility to the replicas.
He was building a whole story. He uploaded an image of an invoice for the authentic $240,000 paintings that he had sold years earlier. He used this official-looking documentation to convince a buyer in California to purchase the replicas for $80,000.
And the buyer figured it out.
Immediately. When the buyer received them, they noticed right away that the authentication stamps were missing, and critically, the canvas staples were fresh.
Oh.
A dead giveaway they were recent copies, not vintage works.
And when confronted, his response wasn't panic, it was calculated stalling. Walshe used layers of excuses, feigned injury deflected for months.
A pattern.
A pattern of deliberate delay and deception he later deployed when police questioned him about Anna's disappearance. This is the key takeaway, I think. He had a proven track record of calculated, methodical criminal planning designed to erase evidence and confuse authorities.
And this criminal background is absolutely central because at the time of Anna's murder, Brian was effectively trapped. He was on house arrest, awaiting sentencing for that 2021 guilty plea related to wire fraud and unlawful monetary transaction charges, all stemming from the art scam.
Which means his confinement to the Cohasset home came with very strict judicial rules. It dictated when he could leave. Only for specific pre-approved activities like school drop-offs or grocery runs, and only within specified timeframes, usually something like between 8 a.m. and 10:30 a.m.
And that constraint, that tracking mechanism, was the single most pivotal investigative tool the state had.
Huh. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Any unauthorized movement was a violation of his house arrest, which is exactly what allowed police to hold him in custody immediately on January 8th. It gave them the crucial time they needed to begin piecing together the murder investigation. He was later sentenced to 37 months for the art fraud, concurrent with the murder proceedings, which just sealed his fate on both counts.
So if you look at the whole picture then, you've got Ana, the soaring, ambitious executive planning divorce and relocation.
Right.
And then you have Brian, the financially dependent, sociopathic, convicted felon who's facing imminent prison time. This created the massive financial and emotional crisis that prosecutors really defined in late 2022. The motive elements they presented at trial were powerful, but they all converged on this central theme of control and money. First, the relationship was poisoned by infidelity and paranoia. Brian strongly suspected Ana was having an affair.
Yeah, the source material notes he even used his mother to hire a private investigator to surveil Ana in D.C.
And the man she was allegedly having an affair with even testified at trial, right?
He did. He testified, confirming she was planning to leave Brian and take the children with her. That established the marital crisis beyond a doubt. But the truly devastating motive, the one that established the legal definition of premeditation, was the financial incentive.
Right.
It always comes back to money. The prosecution argued that divorce would have left Brian destitute and childless. His income was negligible, his reputation was destroyed by the fraud conviction, his inheritance was long gone. But Ana's death provided a massive financial out, a perverse opportunity.
Life insurance.
A $2.7 million life insurance payout, naming Brian as the sole beneficiary. That financial dependency, the massive potential payout, combined with the immediate threat of divorce and incarceration, that provided the devastating motive the prosecution needed.
So this financial element is what transforms it from a domestic argument into a calculated first-degree murder.
Exactly.
With the motive and the constraints firmly established, we now pivot to the harrowing minute-by-minute timeline, which was meticulously reconstructed, not by witnesses, but almost entirely through Brian Walshe's own digital research and physical movements.
So let's set the scene. It's New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2022. The Walshes hosted their close friend Jem Mutlu for dinner at their Cohasset home. Mutlu later described the atmosphere as strangely festive. He noted Brian cooked an elaborate meal and that there was absolutely no indication of any discord.
It's chilling.
It is, because
Okay.
it suggests Brian successfully masked his lethal intentions, acting completely normal right up until the guest departed.
And Mutlu left around 1:30 a.m. on January 1st. This marks the last confirmed sighting of Ana Walshe alive by a third party. This time is so critical. According to investigators, the murder likely took place in the early hours of January 1st, sometime between 1:30 a.m. and 4:00 a.m.
And likely in the home's basement, where police later found that evidence of blood.
Yeah.
And this is where Brian's fabrication begins immediately. Brian claimed he and Ana went to bed, and she supposedly left between 4:00 a.m. and 6:00 a.m. for a work emergency flight. He said she took an Uber or a Lyft to get to D.C.
A story that fell apart instantly.
Instantly. Law enforcement quickly disproved this fabricated departure story. Police confirmed zero rideshare activity was summoned to the Cohasset address, no taxi was contacted, and critically, Ana's cell phone never left the vicinity of the Cohasset home during that time frame. It pinged locally for days afterwards. Her scheduled flight for January 3rd remained unused.
So her departure story was a complete documented lie. It confirmed she was already deceased or incapacitated inside that house. And this segment of the timeline is where the investigation truly shifted gears. It moved from a missing person case to documented premeditation, all thanks to the digital data extracted from his son's iPad.
Which Brian used extensively that morning.
He did. And the progression of these searches is just horrifying, precisely because it acts as a step-by-step documentation of his shift from shock and disposal to planned destruction and finally to financial gain.
Let's analyze the early queries. These indicate an immediate, almost frantic concern over disposal. These searches start barely 4 hours after their guests left. At 4:55 a.m., the query was, how long before a body starts to smell.
Wow.
This suggests the victim was already deceased and present in the home, requiring immediate odor control or some kind of preservation effort. This is immediately followed by a series of very practical searches. At 4:58 a.m., he searched how to stop a body from decomposing. Then at 5:20 a.m., how to bind a body, which you have to assume was for transport or concealment.
And finally, at 5:47 a.m., 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. This first hour of searches, it clearly shows an immediate reaction focused on eliminating the physical evidence of death.
But the truly critical piece of evidence, the query that legally cemented the financial motive and destroyed any potential defense about a crime of passion or panic, that hit the server at 6:25 a.m. We need to pause on this time. The search was, how long for someone to be missing to inherit?
That single query, occurring less than 2 hours after the alleged time of death, it links the violent act directly to a massive financial gain. It establishes the intent to profit from the death, which is the very definition of premeditation. The prosecution effectively used this to argue that the murder wasn't a spontaneous act of rage, but a deliberate act designed to solve Brian's compounding financial and legal problems.
And this is where the dialogue has to shift from just reporting to critical analysis. I mean, if he was in such a state of panic, as his defense later claimed, why is the first methodical step after figuring out odor and disposal to calculate the financial windfall? It's the fatal flaw. It's the fatal flaw in the meticulous planning that he learned from the Warhol fraud. In that scheme, he calculated every move to maximize profit and avoid detection. Here, he repeated the pattern. Intent to profit, then planning the cover-up. A truly panicked person finds a dead body and searches how to report a death or call 911.
Of course.
Brian searched for inheritance timeframes. The order of operations just utterly betrayed his state of mind.
Exactly. And once that financial motivation was secured digitally, the plan immediately shifted back to the execution and destruction phase. It confirms that dismemberment was the chosen method. At 6:34 a.m., barely 10 minutes after the inheritance search, he queried, "Can you throw away body parts?"
I mean, it's just so blatant, and the destruction planning accelerates throughout the morning and into the afternoon. At 9:59 a.m., he searched. Can identification be made on partial remains?
So he's worried about forensics.
He's showing a calculated forensic intent to prevent the positive identification of the corpse. And this concern over identification is reinforced at 11:34 a.m. with the search. Dismemberment and the best ways to dispose of a body, finalizing the exact method of destruction.
And once the destruction method was settled, the crime scene cleanup had to begin. He's showing an awareness that police forensics would inevitably arrive at some point. At 11:44 a.m., he searched how to clean blood from wooden floor. And then, showing an awareness of advanced police forensic capabilities, at 11:46 a.m., he searched luminol to detect blood.
And for listeners who may not be familiar, luminol is a chemical compound used by forensic investigators. It reacts with the iron in blood, causing it to glow blue. It reveals even minute, invisible traces of blood that have been thoroughly washed away.
So the fact that Brian was actively researching the tool police would use to find his crime scene shows he was trying to enact counter-forensic measures before he even left the house to buy the cleanup supplies.
He was trying to create the perfect non-scene.
And this detailed, obsessive planning continued into the afternoon with searches related to chemical destruction. 9:29 a.m. What does formaldehyde do? And at 1:08 p.m., what happens when you put body parts in ammonia?
So he was exploring chemical preservation, chemical destruction techniques, showing an intent to completely erase the biological material, not just dispose of it.
And the final queries related to cleaning evidence came at 1:21 p.m. Is it better to throw crime scene clothes away or wash them?
The digital record is complete. It provides a minute-by-minute account of his planning, motive, execution, and cleanup methodology.
Now we shift from the digital plan to his physical movements, which just perfectly corroborate the digital timeline. Let's focus first on January 1st. Brian claimed he was running errands and visited his mother in Swampscott about an hour away. He even claimed he got lost to explain the extended trip duration and his absence from the Cohasset home.
And this is where that house arrest monitoring became crucial. Forensic fact. Surveillance footage obtained by investigators did not capture him at the stores he claimed to visit, like Whole Foods or CVS. But surveillance did place him at a dumpster near his mother's apartment complex in Swampscott. Investigators believe this is one of the initial frantic disposal sites for blood-soaked evidence or clothing.
And his unauthorized movement, leaving the prescribed zone without specific approval, was immediately noted as a house arrest violation.
Which is exactly why the police had the grounds to hold him later.
The cleanup efforts then escalated dramatically on January 2nd. This coincides exactly with the detailed searches about dismemberment and cleaning.
Yes.
Surveillance footage from a Home Depot in Rockland became a key piece of visual evidence.
And his appearance was so suspicious, which the jury later saw in great detail. He wore a black surgical mask and blue surgical gloves, a clear attempt to conceal his identity and fingerprints while making the purchase. He spent about $450, paid entirely in cash, another deliberate attempt to avoid a credit card paper trail linking him to the materials.
And the inventory of that $450 cash purchase,
Yeah.
it just speaks volumes when you cross-reference it directly with his search history.
It really does. He purchased standard cleanup items: mops, buckets, tarps, drop cloths. But the highly specific items were the real tell. Tyvek suits full-body protective gear designed to prevent contamination baking soda, which is frequently used for heavy odor control, and critically, a hatchet.
The hatchet.
The purchase of the hatchet and the Tyvek suits directly aligns with the dismemberment theory he researched digitally just hours earlier. The Home Depot trip provided the physical means to match the digital intent.
And compounding his deception, Ana's cell phone still pinged in the area of the Cohasset home on this day, completely contradicting his claim that she was actively working in D.C.
The lies were just piling up.
By January 3rd, the final disposal run began in earnest. Interestingly, his search history was still active. He was now searching for things like what happens to hair on a dead body and hacksaw, best tool to dismember.
He's still refining his methodology.
Continuously.
And on that day, cell phone data was able to track Brian's journey to multiple apartment complexes in Abington and Brockton. Surveillance video from those locations showed him exiting his vehicle near large commercial dumpsters, carrying what appeared to be extremely heavy garbage bags. He was observed visibly struggling with the weight of the bags, which was consistent with the disposal of dense biological material and all the cleanup evidence.
This minute-by-minute reconstruction, combining the digital footprint of intent with the physical footprint of execution, that's the entire essence of the digital corpus delicti.
Yeah.
But the investigation only crystallized into a homicide case after the physical evidence was recovered from the waste stream, which took an extraordinary effort.
Right. And before we get to the discovery, we should note the catalyst for the official investigation. The first major red flag was the delayed report. Ana was reported missing on January 4th, but not by her husband or family.
No.
She was reported missing by her Tishman Spear employees in D.C. after she failed to show up for work following the holiday.
And when contacted by police, Brian maintained his fabricated story, feigning ignorance about her location. He even left a voicemail for a friend saying, Ana hasn't been in touch for a few days, and I'm sure everything is fine.
That's incredible.
This consistent, calculated lying is what provided the initial criminal charge of misleading police.
During the initial well-being check at the Cohasset home on January 4th, police officers noted several suspicious details that immediately shifted their attention. In Brian's Volvo, they observed that the rear seats were folded down with a plastic liner spread out, a configuration highly consistent with the transport of large, potentially dismembered remains.
Oh, wow.
They also discovered visible blood and a damaged bloody knife in the basement, confirming the location of the primary crime scene.
So based on the mounting inconsistencies, his unauthorized movements violating house arrest, and the discovery of evidence in the home, Brian was arrested on January 8th. Initially just charged with misleading police. But this provided the crucial 8 days of custody that allowed police to launch the complex, resource-intensive forensic investigation into the regional waste stream.
And this is where the investigation became a truly meticulous effort. Investigators tracked the specific waste collection routes from every dumpster Brian had visited in Swampscott, Abington, and Brockton. They had to understand exactly when the commercial waste was picked up and where it was routed.
It's like a needle in a haystack.
A massive haystack. This dedicated forensic work led them to the Republic Services Transfer Station in Peabody, Massachusetts. This facility acts as a sorting hub before trash moves to final disposal. This is the crucial moment where the digital intent literally met the physical proof. Investigators had to search through a massive volume of trash bags, often by hand, over several days.
And the Peabody Transfer Station discovery provided the irrefutable physical link the prosecution needed. Among all that refuse, investigators found 2 of the key tools Brian had researched and, in the case of the hatchet, purchased.
A hacksaw and a hatchet.
Both. But they found much more. They found remnants of the cleanup rug fragments stained with blood, cleaning supplies, and crucial items of protective gear, including the Tyvek suits.
And furthermore, they found items that definitively proved the victim did not voluntarily leave. They found Anna's Prada purse, her hunter boots, and her COVID-19 vaccination card.
The vaccination card.
Yes. These personal discarded items immediately negated any remote suggestion that Anna had voluntarily disappeared to D.C. They weren't forgotten. They were discarded as refuse.
It's important to note the tragic loss mentioned in the sources here. While the sheer volume of evidence recovered was overwhelming, investigators determined that the primary bulk of Anna's bodily remains were likely in other trash bags. Bags that had already been transported from the transfer station to a massive waste-to-energy facility in Wareham, Massachusetts.
And by the time police tracked those specific bags, the material had been incinerated at extreme heat, rendering the recovery of the body impossible.
So he almost got away with that part.
He did. But despite the loss of the physical body, the items they did recover allowed the Massachusetts State Crime Laboratory to create a definitive DNA connection, which was the final physical nail in the defense's coffin.
Let's talk specifics about the DNA. The laboratory confirmed Ana Walshe's DNA on the blades of both the hatchet and the hacksaw recovered from the Peabody trash.
And this isn't trace DNA. This suggests significant contact. These were the documented tools of dismemberment and destruction purchased by Brian Walshe.
Unbelievable.
And the analysis of the Tyvek suit was perhaps the most devastating single piece of physical evidence.
How so?
The analysis showed a distinct contrast. The interior of the suit contained Brian Walshe's DNA from sweat or skin cells, proving he was the one wearing it. But crucially, the exterior of the suit was stained with Ana Walshe's blood.
Wow.
This analysis definitively placed Brian and Brian alone, wearing protective gear, in direct contact with the victim's body and the subsequent cleanup operation. It linked the defendant to the dismemberment and disposal beyond any plausible, reasonable doubt, regardless of where the body itself ended up.
So it didn't matter that the body was gone?
It didn't. The rigorous DNA testing had to rule out contamination, and the fact they confirmed separate DNA profiles inside and outside the protective suit spoke volumes about the care taken by the lab.
The forensic triumph here was undeniable. Police were able to establish motive, means, timeline, and link the perpetrator directly to the destruction of the body, all without ever recovering the victim herself.
Yeah.
This complex evidence mosaic then led to the trial in Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham in December 2025.
Right.
And the challenge for the prosecution was enormous. Convincing a jury to convict on a first-degree murder charge, which requires premeditation, without the traditional primary evidence, the corpse.
Their strategy was anchored in the success of the digital corpus delicti. They argued they did not need a corpse. They had the motive financial gain. They had the means hatchet, hacksaw, Tyvek, and they had the opportunity house arrest, early morning window, all of it corroborated by the defendant's own immutable digital record.
So they just built the case brick by brick.
Brick by brick. The prosecution, led by the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, constructed the case based on those three pillars and built an airtight timeline. They called 47 witnesses to the stand. These included the man with whom Anna was allegedly having an affair, which firmly established that marital crisis motive. Representatives from Home Depot, JetBlue, and financial institutions verified every purchase, the lack of flight activity, and Brian's underlying financial desperation.
And the most compelling testimony, of course, came from the forensic experts who meticulously detailed the DNA matches on the dismemberment tools. They explained the chain of custody for the recovered items, proving they came from the exact waste stream Brian utilized.
And to give the jury a tangible connection to the crime, despite the lack of a body, they relied heavily on visual impact. Jurors were shown the surveillance tapes of Brian, shrouded in the black surgical mask and gloves during his cash purchase at Home Depot.
Right.
They also saw the grisly photos of the blood-soaked items, the hacksaw, and the hatchet recovered from the refuse. This evidence made the crime feel real and immediate, overwhelming the jury with the physicality of the cover-up.
So facing this overwhelming digital and forensic evidence Brian himself created, his defense team adopted a very high-risk strategy.
They did. They essentially admitted Brian was guilty of something, the cover-up, to try and avoid the murder conviction.
A partial admission.
Exactly. The defense presented what was dubbed the sudden death theory. They recognized the futility of denying the trash evidence, the cleanup, or the searches. Their narrative was that Brian did not kill Anna. Instead, he woke up on New Year's Day and found her dead in bed, implying a sudden natural cause or an overdose.
But that raises a good question. If the evidence of the cover-up was that overwhelming, why did the defense think the sudden death panic theory had any chance at all?
They were banking entirely on reasonable doubt regarding the initial cause of death.
Ah,
If they could convince the jury that the prosecution hadn't absolutely proven Brian caused the death, even if he dismembered and disposed of the body out of panic, they could potentially avoid a first-degree murder conviction.
so they were aiming for a lesser charge.
Exactly. Manslaughter or simply improper disposal. Brian Walshe did not testify, and the defense rested without calling a single witness, essentially betting everything on the lack of a body, creating that sliver of reasonable doubt.
But the prosecution had an immediate and devastating counter-argument that completely dismantled the panic defense. And they used the very thing Brian thought would protect him, his Google searches.
The logical rebuttal was simple and unavoidable. The timeline of his searches destroyed the narrative of a frantic reaction to a tragedy. The prosecution stated clearly, a genuinely panicked person who finds a dead body might search, what to do if I find a dead body.
Right.
A panicked person does not, however, stop to search at 6:25 a.m. how long for someone to be missing to inherit.
That's the one. That's the killer search.
That specific search was the definitive proof of premeditation and motive. It occurred barely 90 minutes after the alleged time of death and before he had fully mapped out the disposal plan. The prosecution demonstrated that the entire sequence of searches, from smelling decomposition to binding the body to calculating inheritance to researching dismemberment, was inconsistent with a frantic reaction to a tragedy. It was a calculated action sequence designed to profit from the elimination of his wife.
The digital record proved the motive, and the physical record proved the means and cleanup. The jury, seemingly overwhelmed by the weight of this evidence, did not take long at all to render their decision.
Not long at all.
On December 15, 2025, after only 6 hours of deliberation, which is a remarkably short time for a first-degree murder case, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder.
6 hours.
The speed of that verdict spoke volumes. It suggested the digital evidence, supported by the forensic finds, was, in the end, absolutely conclusive. Sentencing was set for December 17, 2025, resulting in a mandatory life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole.
And while the legal chapter is closed for Brian Walshe, the human toll of this crime is immense, and it focuses primarily on the 3 Walshe children who were ages 2, 4, and 6 at the time of the murder.
Just babies.
Following Brian's arrest and subsequent conviction, the children were immediately placed in the custody of the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, or DCF. What followed was a heartbreaking legal and emotional struggle over their future, complicated by the international nature of the family.
Ana's mother, Milanka Jubicic, residing in Serbia, she petitioned for custody, right?
She did, but she faced insurmountable barriers due to her age in her 70s and her poor health.
And Brian's mother, Ana Walshe, was ultimately deemed unsuitable for custody. I assume due to the existing family estrangement and background issues related to Brian's past behavior and financial misconduct.
That's right. The sources highlight that friends of the Walshes publicly pleaded for the adoption of the boys together to prevent their separation given their young ages. But reports indicate the children remain in state care, their future is heartbreakingly uncertain, and their separation from family just a devastating consequence of their father's actions.
This raises an important question, then, about modern criminality and the ability of technology to document our intentions.
It does.
The Commonwealth v. Brian Walshe case serves as a grim testament to the impossibility of achieving the perfect crime in the digital age.
Brian Walshe was a man with a proven history of meticulous, high-stakes deception. You see that in the Warhol fraud. He attempted to apply that same level of calculated deceit to homicide, believing he could research, execute, and erase a murder using the tools of the internet and the vast anonymity of the waste stream.
He nearly succeeded in erasing the physical proof. He knew about luminol, he purchased Tyvek suits, he used cash, he planned every aspect of the physical cover-up meticulously, just as he had planned the execution of the art fraud.
But his conviction was secured not by the recovery of Ana Walshe's body, but by the indestructible digital echoes of his premeditated intent. Every search query was effectively a confession that established the timing, the means, and that critical financial motive. His digital trail was more reliable, more precise, and ultimately more damning than any physical evidence could have been.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The Brian Walshe case demonstrates the breathtaking power of technology to document even our most hidden intentions. Brian's elaborate efforts to cover his tracks were undermined by 2 catastrophic errors. First, he used a shared, traceable device, his son's iPad, that investigators had the right to seize.
A huge mistake.
And second, and more importantly, he associated the criminal act with his clear financial gain in his searches. That's what transformed a disposal query into proof of premeditation. So considering how much of our lives, our communications, our searches, our locations, our spending are now digitally tracked, this case definitively redefines what evidence means in the modern criminal justice system. The true power of the digital corpus delicti is the record of intent, not just the proof of the act. And that is something for you to mull or explore on your own.